This is the biggest mistake I ever made in my life as a surgeon. I'm going to tell you two things that you should never, ever do when you are thinking about how to handle complicated situations as a surgeon so that you could avoid these mistakes. And the mistake that I'm going to share with you right now, that happens to be the biggest one I ever did, is about what happened when I got the call about my father who woke up in the middle of the night with horrible chest pain. My gut instinct was to tell him, look, you need to go straight to the emergency room, call the ambulance, because I'm like, look, you're probably having a heart attack. You need to go immediately. I'm on the other side of the country. He called me from Fresno, California. I was living in Baltimore. I was a resident at the time. And I was like, Dad, you just have to go and get seen immediately. So he did call the ambulance. They took him in. And, I called the hospital and I spoke with the ER doc and I asked, is he doing okay? They said, yeah, we're getting EKG. We're doing all the workup. We're getting labs. We're worried he may be having some heart issue, but we're treating him with medication. We're calling cardiology. And, I thought, okay, that sounds like they're doing all the right things. And I told my dad, they're taking good care of you. It sounds like they're doing all the right stuff. And I kind of left it at that. Well, I think that I probably should have dug a little deeper. Never, ever assume that the other person who's working up someone is going to make all the right decisions. I assumed. And that was a big mistake because my dad actually had an acute aortic dissection and they didn't get a CAT scan. And basically what that means is he had a tear in his aorta, the biggest blood vessel that comes off of the heart. It was pumping blood into the wall of that and it ruptured and he basically bled to death and died. And they assumed that he was just having, a heart attack or a minor chest pain because of, bad blood flow to the heart, which if that was the case, they potentially could have saved him with other things, but they missed the diagnosis. The other thing is, do your job to make sure that you're figuring out what's wrong. And I should have asked some of those critical questions to my dad and to the ER doc. I just assumed they would do the right thing. And, I think that if I would have dug a little deeper, they could have potentially gotten the CAT scan, diagnosed my dad with the problem that he had, and then they could have called a cardiac surgeon who could have potentially saved his life. So I carry that burden with me, and I've carried it for a long time. And that really does bother me because I think my dad could have potentially still been alive if I would have perhaps not assumed that someone else is going to do the right thing. I took that to an extreme though, and eventually I got to a point where I was like, okay, there's no way I'm ever going to let anything like that happen to any of my patients or any of my family members. And unfortunately, a year later after that event, my son, Marcus, had a horrible head injury. He fell off his skateboard, almost died. And when he had to have emergency neurosurgery to clear out blood that was on his brain, I was like all over his post-operative care. I was super involved, almost too much so. I was watching him 24/7. I wasn't getting enough sleep. I actually had to have my program director, I was still a resident at the time, I was a chief resident when this happened. My program director, the ICU staff had to call her to talk to me because they were like, look, James is like trying to be his doctor and his dad at the same time, and it was too much. So I took that to a whole other extreme, and she came and talked to me and she said, James, I hear that you're like giving him a really hard time. And I was literally, there's one point I was threatening to put an arterial line in my own son because they were trying to manage his blood pressures based on a blood pressure cuff, and they were giving medication to keep his blood pressure exactly where it needed to be. And I felt like it wasn't the right way to do it, which it wasn't, but my tactics, my threatening to do it myself wasn't the way. But I was speaking from that experience that happened a year ago with my dad, that I was like, there is no way that I'm going to allow someone to make a mistake that will hurt my son and make it so that he's not going to be able to have the best outcome. So anyway, I think that we make mistakes as doctors, and it's how we come back from those mistakes and how we learn and how we move forward to make sure that our future patients don't suffer the consequences of the mistakes that we may have made. So never assume, and always make sure you do your job to look into what's going on to make sure you verify that whatever it is you think is going on is in fact what's happening. So I hope these tips help. God bless and take care.